so much more material than it could before and just throw it directly into a receiving water, that's really causing us to be concerned. Where we would have normally infiltration occurring, this impervious surface is not allowing for that recharge of our groundwater to occur, and it's causing high velocity water movement. And from the Center for Watershed Protection, from email programs from down, we've all seen some version of this slide where in a typical situation with the proper vegetation, we're looking at only about 10% of a rainstorm resulting in runoff, whereas when we start really covering those surfaces up, we're getting a tremendous decrease in the recharge of shallow and deep groundwater, as well as a tremendous increase in the amount of runoff that we're seeing. And since the lowering to our aquatic systems is the concentration times the volume of water, it almost, in a lot of cases, is insignificant almost what the concentration might be coming off of a property, more than it's important to reduce that runoff, because it's that multiplier effect that's really causing the problem. We're really disrupting the water cycle, where we're really creating an increased amount of velocity, an increased amount of runoff in any given period of time. If you look at peak flow, if you look at staggering flows, it's many times greater. We've lost our natural storage capacity from vegetation, wetlands, and soils, which allowed those areas around the shorelands to act as sponges and to slow things down. We've reduced groundwater recharge significantly and we definitely see that during drought years. We're taking all that material that used to be recharged, all that water that used to be recharged, and throwing it down into our surface water systems, and eventually, in most cases, down into the ocean. So we're really losing that long-term recharge that we need, and in that case, by decreasing groundwater recharge, we're also decreasing stream base flow. And all of this is having an impact on both our capital in terms of our resources, as well as its impact on the aquatic systems as a whole. In New Hampshire, we base our management on river watersheds, and I'm going to focus here on just the Winnipesaukee watershed to talk about typically what we're dealing with. In northern New England and even northeast, in fact, the situation that we find is that we have even our largest lake in New Hampshire here, Lake Winnipesaukee. You can see this black line represents the watershed divide. And what you definitely see here is that our watershed areas, at least in the northeast, are not very big in terms of the extent of water and the extent of land around it. That's the drainage area. You can sit in a boat in Lake Winnipesaukee and see that divide of the watershed all around you. You don't see this in the Midwest. You can go for miles, 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 and miles and miles. For example, in Madison, Wisconsin, taking a look at the watershed for Lake Mendota or something like that, and probably what happens at the edge of the watershed there might not have a lot of repercussions to the lake itself unless you're near a tributary stream or some sort of transport route. But in northern New England and in a lot of areas, anything that really goes on in the watershed is very close to the watershed and typically very steep, so there's that impact potential that occurs. So as we talked about reconsidering these shoreline areas, in a lot of cases like northern New England, we might also be thinking about, in terms of water quality function, the impact of the total watershed. As some of our research actually has shown, sometimes the land cover in the total watershed is more indicative of the water quality of the certain sections of these lakes than just the shoreline areas. So these relatively small, relatively steep slope watersheds are what we're dealing with in my neck of the woods. And while we're talking about runoff and its impact, we also want to emphasize that the same concerns we have for what happens to runoff is also included in, sometimes in the case of some of the pollutants, even more in terms of our typical groundwater systems that we are dealing with. The nutrients that we need to grow things also tend to be of concern in aquatic systems. As we know, phosphorus in the terms of lakes seems to be the most limiting nutrient, except for some of the large western lakes. It's chemically sticky so that it attaches to things. It doesn't move through a system very fast. It sticks to sediments. It can be in the form of a combined molecular grouping, but sitting around and having microbiological and other types of things occurring on it, it can be very readily available, as opposed to nitrogen, where we're concerned about that for most of our estuaries and some of our marine systems and some of our large western lakes. It, on the other hand, tends to be extremely mobile, which is one of the problems that we have in terms of keeping it where we want it, and nitrate and ammonia can be toxic to organisms. And as we all know, it's the increase of these nutrient loadings to the aquatic systems that are causing, in some cases lately, some spectacular blooms of different types. This is a toxic blue-green algae, Microcystis, in Lake Champlain. A couple of dogs drank this, this is the situation about 5 years ago, and within hours died from the microcystin toxin that was in it. We like to see a good diversity of plankton in the system. There's a number of organisms that produce different types of toxins, be they typically the blue-green bacteria, be they the Microcystis anabina, Aphanasonema, a lot of different toxins out there that we're actually seeing expressed a lot more than we had before. In fact, one of our research projects at UNH that I worked on was looking at the distribution of these toxins in sediments in lake water and in the algae itself across a range of lakes of different productivity. And surprising to us is the result that where we expected productivity to be a real determinant of the amount of toxin in the water, we actually found some situations where we had some very pristine lakes where we were seeing high expressions of toxicity of the toxin, well above levels that would be of concern listed by the World Health Organization. Definitely of concern when these things, senesce, come up to the surface and get blown into an area where they're extremely concentrated. And the interesting thing here is that although phosphorus is the controlling nutrient, we actually found a high correlation of nitrogen levels in the water. Really was a good predictor of the amount of toxin both in the sediments as well as the amount of toxin being expressed in the organism. So while we still don't completely understand why these organisms generate the toxins that they do and what initiates that, we do know that nitrogen does play a part. And the other concern we have in terms of pollutants, the pollutant sediment, where besides being a particle that allows for the transport of adhering nutrient, phosphorus, and pesticides, we're dealing with shading out these aquatic systems that typically need sunlight to efficiently work. It damages the gills of aquatic critters. It encourages the growth of invasive species, and it smothers nursery and nesting areas. We talked a little bit in the earlier discussion about pesticides, and the one that I like to use in my work looks at what we do know about, for example, some of the comparative toxicity levels, because we hear a lot about, well, we expect a dilution effect to occur. As would be expected, the less active fish, for example, might have a higher tolerance. In this case, 1 teaspoon in about almost 800 gallons is what it takes to have an impact on a bluegill population. If you take a look at rainbow trout, a little bit more active fish, we have a much greater impact with a smaller amount. Now, they all need things to eat, however, so we really need to not just look at the organism at the top of the trophic level, but start looking at the organisms, as was mentioned before by David, at the primary and secondary levels, and in and around there in the food web. And for a stonefly, for example, it doesn't really take a whole mess to have an impact on the population there if this is running into a stream area. And most important is that you can have an impact in the parts per trillion level when we're talking about zooplankton grazers like the water flea daphnia, where we're really in need of these types of trophic levels being efficiently working, because it's the daphnia that are the sheep of our systems. I used to do a lot of course, help with pond nutrient control or pond algal control, actually. And a lot of times it wasn't that they were getting too many nutrients in, but their fungicides and things were affecting the very sensitive grazers, those microscopic grazers. And so for the same amount of nutrient that goes into a system, the response is going to be more. You're going to have greener waters if your system's not working efficiently. If you knock these stages out, you're going to see a much higher productivity response than you would if you have an efficiently working system. And so we really need to think about ecological function here, especially when we're very concerned about the movement of carbon, of nitrogen, and phosphorus through the systems in an efficient way. A healthy ecosystem is going to be able to assimilate a lot more loading than an impaired ecosystem. And when we're talking about shoreline areas, we really have to remember that the shallow water riparian